Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I am Dr. Carolyn Moyers, board certified OBGYN, and I am so excited to be here to have a great discussion with Dr. Jes DeShields, the author of Leader Touchstones. Sorry, screwing up the name of your book, Jess. 9 Leader Touchstones. Talk to me about what inspired you to write this book.
I've been really writing this book for probably about 10 years now, maybe longer. I've probably been writing this book my whole life, if I'm being honest. But I think when I was working on my dissertation was focused on looking at how we use a systems approach to solving community problems. And I did a case study at the time on a community who had taken a systems approach to actually eradicating a community problem, which is fairly unheard of. At the time, there was very little research that had been done on this type of approach, but it was very powerful to see what this community had done. And I continued to be a scholar of leadership after leaving my program and went into leadership consulting and continued to run into challenges, challenges in my own workplaces, challenges in the workplaces of the leaders that I worked with. And it just kept occurring to me over and over again that there was something missing, right? That leaders were just beating their heads up against the wall, trying to create sustainable change. And it just wasn't happening, right? It was just never happening. But I think even going beyond the interest of wanting to write this book since grad school, it really started with my mom. When I think about the underlying philosophy of leader first leadership, the underlying philosophy is that leaders first look to self. And that was something that my mother taught me as a young child. We grew up in a pretty difficult situation. We grew up in poverty, surrounded by addiction, and really struggled through the early parts of our childhood. But the one thing that my mom taught me is that we could not put that change on anyone other than ourselves. And so that was really the inspiration behind the leadership model that got us to where we are today.
Right. And so I have known you for, I'm scared to say how long now. 20 plus years. Oh, well,
yeah, a long time.
And so Jess is a natural born leader, number one. It's just is part of your DNA. But I can see how these challenges along the way definitely shaped you from your desire to study psychology. Even when people questioned, well, what would you do with that degree? I feel like you have showed us, right, just what you can do with that degree in your leadership journey. And so there's a difference between your desire to write a book and, seeing that we're hitting our head against the wall and we're not impacting change, to actually doing it, to have that follow through, to have that grit, to bring it to fruition. So is there any particular experience or realization that really motivated you, like, this is the time?
I think it was really when I hit my own wall. It was no longer me helping leaders overcome the struggles that they were doing. It was me struggling in my own work environment, in my own situation. When we were in the midst of the pandemic, in the book, I shift the thinking from the Great Resignation to what I call the Great Awakening, the current day Great Awakening. Yeah. For me, it was more like an awakening and not a resignation. When I left my position at my job, it was because I had this moment where, working these 14-hour days, my kid sitting over here next to me trying to teach her Common Core math, in the middle of all this, watching people that I love get sick, and die. struggling with my own health and all of the challenges that were happening. And I knew that the people that I was working with, they were going through the same thing. They were going through the same struggles. And so it took me kind of having my own awakening. In the book, I talk about crescendos. It was one of my crescendo moments, my big build up in my life where I realized that I had fallen off my path, my life's purpose. I'd fallen too far away from my life's purpose. And so I made the decision in the middle of the pandemic. And I know you know this because you were the first people to interview me when I started my business on your podcast. But I made the decision to start my own business, leave my very comfortable job. And because I wanted to do more, I wanted to help more people, and I wanted to get this message out there that it's not a waste of time to put in the grit and the hard work to build organizations that sustain and that endure, even though those results take longer to achieve. If it means that down the road, yes, we're going to have a greater return for our shareholders, but we're going to impact the life experience, the quality of life for all of our stakeholders. And for me, that's really what this is about, right? And so to bring it to life, I think, to go back to your question, man, it was a challenge, right? To have this new business and to find time to write. But I was driven by something greater than just, I want to write a book. I was driven by this desire to bring this message to the world.
Right. This will live on. I mean, this is really exciting. So in your book, you talk about 3 different challenges that have thrown us into a global leadership crisis. Can you talk about that a little?
Sure. So I've already talked about one of them. One of them was really the pandemic. It was a time when, the Great Awakening, it was a time when people kind of woke up. It's where they finally started questioning their relationship with work, their relationship with the organizations that employ them, but also their relationship with the people that manage them. And so that was one of the big challenges where, 47 million people resigned their positions, but it was more than that, right? The people that left the workforce, they decided that if they were going to come back, they were going to come back on their own terms. And if not, they were going to do things like me, start their own businesses or become a contractor. Like you, start your own business, right? We both did this. But do the things that they wanted to do that gave them meaning, but do it on their own terms. Okay, so that was one of the big pieces that have hit us in the last few years. The other piece is the major generational shift that's happening, and that has been happening for many years now. Right now we sit in a time where 5 generations of people work together in some workforces, or in some workplaces. And so the way we work with people that have grown up in a different time can be really challenging for leaders to understand, how to work with people and meet them where they are. But in addition to that, the largest generation of leaders in the workforce is starting to age out of the workforce, and they have been for some time. In some ways, we've been lucky because baby boomers have decided to stick around in their positions for much longer, probably than any of us thought that they would. But in some ways, we're lucky for that because we haven't done the work to prepare the next generation of leaders to step into those roles that they will be leaving. And I see this every day. We see this when we go into work with our clients. The next generation of leaders, they're not prepared. They're not prepared to lead the companies that they stand to inherit. And it's a problem, right? And the third challenge is really the significant ethical crisis that we've seen happen over the past really couple of decades, coming up on even 3 decades now. Started really at the turn of the century, and scandal after scandal after scandal happening in workplaces, and many times under the guise of creating shareholder value. But really, when an organization implodes, no one is getting value from that organization anymore. So we've been saying that for a long time, that these organizations, these leaders are doing anything that they can to keep their organizations afloat and build shareholder value. But they're doing that oftentimes ultimately, or I should say at the ultimate expense to everyone in the organization.
Yes, fair points. I am so excited that we have your leadership in this and have this book to share with the world as we talk about various leadership behaviors, as you were just alluding to, some questionable ethical behaviors. It's really key that we look to our leaders. It's specifically, we want to pay attention to these 9 leader touchstones that you have alluded to in your book. Can you briefly kind of explain some of the key behaviors you explore and how they impact organizational culture?
Sure. So 9 seems like probably a random number. Ultimately, when we were going through the research, we looked at what specific leader behaviors could impact the development of very specific culture states, what we call culture dimensions, that are necessary in the current time to build enduring organizations. And so before defining the touchstones, we first looked at what do people need in the workplace right now? Okay, so what are the things that people really need? From there, we developed those culture dimensions. And the culture dimensions are trust, belonging, purpose, and vitality. But just like there is a good side of everything, there's also an antithesis to each of those dimensions. So at any given point, an organization will be on a continuum of fear to trust, right? And from isolation to belonging, from apathy to purpose, and from fatigue to vitality. And so we defined these culture dimensions first. And then from there, we looked at what leader behaviors would reliably reinforce these culture dimensions to create the right internal workings of the organization to really unleash the talent, right? To unleash the greatest potential of each person that works in the organization, including the leaders themselves, not just the team, but the leaders themselves. And so we didn't just identify randomly 9 behaviors in isolation. There was some thought behind what are the right behaviors right now. And so some of them are very timeless, and so at any given point in our history, you would say, well, these would be behaviors that any leader at any given time would be valuable to an organization. We start with what we call the big 3. The big 3 are foundational touchstones. And what that means is that most leaders who come into our program, our Leader First program, have some foundation of the big 3. The big 3 are curiosity, emotional intelligence, and courage. And so most of the people that pick up this book and read it, if they get to the touchstone chapters in the second half of the book, they have that foundation starting. They're curious enough to keep going, right? They have the courage to look first to self. And they're emotionally intelligent enough to self-reflect, right? To find, like, where am I in each of these behaviors? So that foundation is really important. From there, we go into integrity and authenticity. Integrity and authenticity, we write them in 2 separate chapters. They're in 2 separate chapters, but they modify each other. And so it's really important to understand that the definition of one impacts the other. So the definitions of the touchstones are defined based on how they shape the organizational system. And so we have authenticity, integrity, almost taken together. The next 3 are what we call the team 3. This is where organizational leaders start to look to their team, the behaviors they demonstrate to really lean into their team. It starts with empathy and then inclusivity and gratitude. So empathy is about understanding your people. Inclusivity is about involving them. And then gratitude is about appreciating them, right? Showing them that they bring value to both you as a leader and to the organization. And then we wrap up the touchstones with what we call the pièce de résistance, the resilience, which is so necessary. And I want to say something about this, Carolyn, about resilience. This was the one, I kept it till the end, and it's because I knew it was going to be the hardest one, the most difficult one for leaders to really embrace. And I will tell you that I had a pretty significant time. I had a challenge actually defining resilience for the model. And the reason why is because the kind of the baseline definition of resilience is the ability to overcome adversity. And I thought to myself, how many times in my life I had overcome adversity and how exhausted by it I was. I mean, the ability to be resilient in the face of adversity is hard, right? It's exhausting. And to me, that definition was a slippery slope for leaders to just tell leaders to keep pushing through the challenges, keep driving through. Well, those leaders that have the ability to manage a decent amount of stress, they're running themselves into the ground. And that's not good for anybody.
Absolutely. Well, a lot of times it's the systems that are broken. Like I'm just thinking about this in perspective of as a physician, we don't want to be any more damn resilient. Been there, done that. The system is broken. Thank you very much. I'm not interested, So I think it really is key that we're looking to how we're showing up, how we're engaging our workforce, how we're creating an impact, not only for our little microcosm of a community and our organizations, but also our impact to the greater world, to our society. It is really important. Yes, we have to be resilient, but you're absolutely right. We've got to look to ourselves first. So I love that you kind of brought it in at the end.
Yeah. And the definition of resilience is, yes, to overcome adversity, but through the lens of energy renewal. So looking at how we renew energy versus how we manage time, which, we have 24 hours in the day. That's never going to change. Right. But the body can infinitely renew energy through the four main well springs of the mind, the body, the spirit, and I'm losing one right now. The mind, the body, the spirit, and I don't know. I'm losing it because I'm getting excited talking about it. But through these four main well springs and emotions. Thank you. So if we can systematically renew energy, focus on renewing energy, then that is how we build our base to be resilient. If we do it in the absence of energy renewal, we run ourselves into the ground, and that's not good for anyone. So we were very clear about how we would define resilience for leaders going into this work.
I love it. So in your research and your writing process, did you come across any surprising or counterintuitive findings about leadership that kind of challenged your preconceptions?
The thing that the biggest finding was actually probably, I'd say the biggest alternate finding to what I initially expected, kind of based on my original hypothesis, was actually the most exciting finding. And so when I started, I wish I had the chart here behind me so I could show you my original hypothesis. My original hypothesis was that there were specific leader behaviors that cultivated specific culture dimensions, and then those culture dimensions created specific sustainable results, almost like a linear model, right? But as I started getting into this, Carolyn, and really looking at the brain science behind each of these touchstones, what I discovered was, first of all, that each touchstone reinforces all four culture dimensions, either directly or indirectly. Some have a very direct linear line, right? Like trust is reinforced by courage, and that produces innovation almost, without fail. Okay. But the other thing that we found, and this was really exciting to me, was not only do the culture dimensions reinforce, the behaviors reinforce the culture dimensions, all of them, but the touchstones reinforce themselves, which means that if a leader is cultivating a specific touchstone. So say a leader is cultivating, the example I use in the book, because we could write a whole book on the brain science behind this. So we try to minimize it down to a few examples. Mm-hmm. If a leader is cultivating emotional intelligence, they are working through some of the challenges they have with approaching fearful situations, kind of keeping their emotions in check, right? Managing the amygdala, a reaction to certain fearful situations. Mm-hmm. Well, that supports them in approaching risk-taking, which is necessary mm-hmm. for engaging courageous behavior. So by working emotional intelligence and cultivating that touchstone, they are simultaneously working on some of the other touchstones as well. So that was the biggest finding that was different from what I originally expected.
Yeah. What's a common misconception about leadership that you aim to debunk in your book?
I love when people talk about leadership. I don't care how they talk about it. It makes me happy when people talk about leadership, but I want to be clear about something. Leadership is not simple. And I often hear people say, we can make it really simple. Here are the 9 simple things you can do to be a great leader. But we really make a clear distinction in this book between managing like projects and time and leading people. There's a distinction that you have to be clear about. And we say, our mission at Crescent Leadership, or our vision, is to restore the distinctive nature of leadership, because it is distinct. And I think that is probably the biggest misconception, is that leadership is a choice. You can be thrust into a position where you're managing people, right? But until you make the choice every day to show up for your people, to self-reflect, to continue to work on yourself, to be the best version of yourself for your team, you're not leading, you're managing. And that's the biggest difference.
I think that's a really important distinction for many leaders who maybe were gifted a role, right? Or were thrown into it and not expected. And in any capacity in which you're leading, I feel like there's a lot of self-growth, and it'll show you who you are. So in today's fast-paced and interconnected world, what challenges do you see leaders facing?
I think the biggest one is that we now have so much research out there that shows the significant power of action-oriented culture building. And, I think John Cotter gave us one of the best research-backed studies to show us the significant return of very focused culture building. But the problem is, in this fast-paced world that we're in, anything that can't be quickly implemented, shown a return within 24, 48 hours, gets tossed out with the morning garbage. And good culture building, kind of built from the right behaviors inside the organization, mm-hmm. It takes time. Mm-hmm. And so if leaders are not, or people who are in lead organizations or in executive roles, don't put in the time, which can be a challenge in the fast-paced environment that we're in, they're not going to build enduring organizations. They're going to build organizations that are vulnerable to the next big crisis that comes their way.
Right. And not to mention, you're going to have higher turnover. You're going to have people looking for the next best thing because they're not bought into the culture. Absolutely. We're not fostering that. Yeah. So what role does self-reflection and continuous learning play in leadership development? And I'm almost asking this from a personal standpoint, because as leading my own organization now, it's sometimes overwhelming, right? How do leaders cultivate these habits where we're self-reflecting, we're continuously learning, and we're implementing that into our leadership style?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Leader First model, the journey, we call it, it's a foundational step. What we call the 4 essential actions is self-reflection. The second step is build awareness. And those two taken together is really introspection. Okay, so building self-awareness is necessary, but it doesn't go far enough, right? You have to continue to build your awareness about why you show up the way you do. And so it's not just as simple as saying, okay, I realize that I'm not comfortable with conflict. Well, why are you not comfortable with conflict? What situations cause you to show up in a better version of yourself? What situations drive you kind of into a blind spot? And from there, you can start to build a strategy around how you address it. So that second step of build awareness is necessary, the entire process of introspection. So self-reflection is foundational. And sometimes we don't like what we see when we answer these questions about ourselves honestly, but that's absolutely the step you have to take to be a truly great leader.
I couldn't agree more. So for those aspiring leaders, what advice do you have for those looking to develop their own leadership skills and make a positive impact, whether they're an entrepreneur working within someone else's business or their own entrepreneur?
I think we work primarily at our company, we work primarily with leaders because we know that this type of work, because we want to build the right systems inside of organizations. But I think the beautiful thing about this book that has made me so excited is how many people are telling me that this is applicable regardless of what type of position you're in, whether you're currently leading people or not. My husband, who is a solo entrepreneur, owns a chiropractic business here in Greenville, South Carolina. He says that going through Leader First Leadership has really changed the way he works with his patients, And so for people who are not currently leading other people, this can be really valuable in setting them off on the right foot, right? Cultivating the right behaviors, both to help them maybe lead laterally, lead up, lead down inside of organizations. And so showing up as their best selves. But many people have told me that the touchstone cultivation actually helps them in their personal lives as well, helps them improve their quality of life outside of the workplace. And that is a really exciting testament to me to hear that this has had that kind of impact.
For sure. Yeah, it's always great whenever, it's all interconnected, right? I signed up for a coaching program a couple of years ago purely for my business and not realizing truly how much it would impact my own personal life. So I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. Okay, finally, what are your hopes for readers who engage with your book? Like, how are you looking forward to them interacting?
I think my desire is that leaders get to the end of the first chapter and they decide to continue the journey. Right at the end of that chapter, the introduction, I tell them that it's not going to be easy and that it's going to take a lot of hard work and that we're going to have some challenges along the way. And so my goal is for them to keep going, right? And then to get to that resilience chapter, because in it, by then, if they've gotten to that point, they really can see what is possible. We end the book going into the conclusion with just a miraculous story of a Leader First client and her journey following Leader First leadership last year. I just want to show them what's possible when they make this investment in themselves, not just for them, but for the people that are under their care. They've chosen to be in leadership positions because it is a choice. And so I want to demonstrate to them what might be possible. So my goal for them is to get through it and for them to start making those minor but consistent changes in how they lead. And that's gonna be what makes all the difference.
So if I hear you right, you're really hoping that they take away the courage and the bravery to look at themselves, to see how they can not only impact the culture within their workplace, but within their organization, within their community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Very exciting. I'm just so proud of this book. I'm so proud of your hard work. And for having the courage to step outside of the box and to create something so unique to impact even more people than you can impact within a single organization. Jess, this is just remarkable. So I just applaud you. I'm so excited for you. I'm here to cheer you along in the journey. Thank you so much for having me to kind of foster this conversation.
Absolutely. So, Carolyn, do we have time to see if there are any questions from the group online?
Sure, sure.
And while you're doing that, I know James is helping us as well, kind of in the background to rally those questions. But I just want to remind everybody that we launched the book today. And so it's available anywhere books are sold. We are available on Amazon, of course, Barnes & Noble, and many other, but you can go to our website. It's leader-touchstones.com and learn more about the book and learn more about how to get it. We also have some really cool launch week bonuses for people who buy the book for their team. So you can find all that online as well. James, are you there?
I am. Just waiting on the other questions. One that came to mind is, can you just give a quick update as far as, you said there's some specials if people buy the book this week and or if they buy it for their office. What kind of deal is that?
So we have a few different levels depending on how many books you purchase, but most of it comes down to, I think if it's 2 or more books, you get invited to an exclusive webinar that I'm hosting in December. And that webinar introduces a new concept that comes out in the resilience chapter called life actualization. It's really a lot of fun, but it really talks about energy renewal and how that impacts your ability to lead well and also impacts your greater life outside of the workplace. And then I think from like 6 on, there are various levels where we do some private one-on-one coaching with me or team coaching with me as well. So each of those levels, you can see those levels on the website and determine if you want to take advantage of that.
That sounds great. I was also looking, are we going to be linking the book site to the main Crescent Leadership site going forward?
So it already is linked under, I think it's linked under my profile under our team, but we'll have a landing page kind of in the back of the Crescent Leadership website to make sure people can go there. And one thing I want to mention, James, is that we're launching this week our Leader Touchstones assessment. We have 2 major assessments that go along with this work. One is the Leader Touchstone assessment. And so people who buy the book, by the end of this week, we're still having some technical difficulties with our assessment partner, but by the end of this week, you'll be able to go online to our website, to our Crescent Leadership website, and download your free assessment to give you kind of a baseline understanding of where you are in each of the 9 touchstones. And then in addition to that, we already have, and we've been in pilot with it for a couple of years, our dynamic enduring organizational culture assessment. So we work with our organizations to gauge where they are in the 4 culture dimensions to give them their baseline and developing a good culture plan, an action-oriented culture plan.
Oh, very exciting. I know you mentioned before some future thoughts. Do you see yourself touching on other parts of this book in future writings?
Yes, so I put this out into the world during the celebration night on Saturday. Our team knows that we're thinking about doing this, but when we were writing the book, I probably took out 100 pages of content, and you're probably still going to read it and say, "Wow, Jess, this is a really long book." But the touchstone chapters, man, I feel like I just rushed through them. But the goal is just to give you enough insight to help you understand this is what the touchstone is. This is how we define it. This is the brain science behind it. And these are the ways you cultivate it in yourself. This is how you cultivate it in your team. That's a lot in just a 10, 15 page chapter. But there is so much more that I couldn't bring in there, including stories and things like that. And so one of the things we desire to do is to create a box set of touchstone primers. So we would co-write with an expert in the field a primer on each touchstone. So an expert on curiosity co-writing with me to really dive into curiosity even deeper, and do that with each of the 9 touchstones. That's our kind of our next goal, but we're gonna take a little rest first before we get into that.
Well, it sounds like a great idea. That's pretty much it for the questions at this point in time, unless any of the other people that are still on the call want to jump in.
All right, I think we're good then. Well, Carolyn, thank you for jumping on with me. And it's almost like you're the bookend to this experience. I know this experience is not over, but you were with me you've been with me for a long time, friend. But from the beginning of this journey to this big culmination we're at right now. So I really appreciate you joining me today and being a part of this interview.
Oh, absolutely. It's an honor. Thank you so much.
All right. And thanks everyone for stopping in. We'll post this online so others can see it as well. Thanks, everyone. All right. And thanks, everyone, for stopping in. We'll post this online so others can see it as well. Thanks, everyone.